The man who dies rich dies disgraced. I wrote those words in 1889. I meant them then. I mean them now. I built my entire philosophy around them, and I spent the last 18 years of my life proving I believed them by giving away 90% of everything I had accumulated. When I died in 1919, my estate was worth $30 million, down from over 500 million at its peak. I had systematically distributed $350 million, built 2,800 libraries, funded universities, established research institutions, created foundations that continue operating today. I died having given away almost everything, and I died fulfilled, content, purposeful, rich in everything that actually matters. But most wealthy people die the opposite way. They die with their fortunes intact, with more money than they ever used, with resources that could have changed thousands of lives sitting in accounts doing nothing, with power they never deployed, with potential they never realized. They die disgraced, not publicly. Most people do not recognize the disgrace, but the disgrace is real nonetheless. The disgrace of wasted opportunity, the disgrace of hoarded resources, the disgrace of potential never realized, the disgrace of a life that accumulated but never distributed, the disgrace of dying having taken more than you gave. Let me tell you why dying rich is a disgrace. Not as moral judgment, not as religious doctrine, but as simple truth about what wealth is and what it is for, and what happens when you die with it instead of deploying it. I was born poor, Dunfermline, Scotland. My father was a weaver who became obsolete when the machines arrived. We emigrated to America when I was 13. I worked in a factory basement as a bobbin boy, 13 hours a day for $1.20 a week. I know what poverty is. I know what powerlessness feels like. I know what it means to be at the mercy of forces you cannot control. I know what it means to watch your family starve. I know what it means to have no options. And I know what wealth did for me. Wealth gave me power, options, control, security, freedom, the ability to shape my circumstances instead of being shaped by them, the ability to help others instead of needing help, the ability to build instead of just survive. Wealth saved me. Wealth liberated me. Wealth gave me everything I needed to live a meaningful life. But here's what I learned. Wealth beyond what you need to live well is not yours. It never was yours. You are a temporary steward. You are holding resources that belong to society. You are managing capital that should be deployed for public good. You are controlling power that should be used to help others. This is not socialism. This is not redistribution. This is not taken from the rich to give to the poor. This is understanding what wealth actually is. Wealth is accumulated labor, accumulated value, accumulated resources. You did not create it alone. You created it using systems built by others, using infrastructure funded by others, using labor provided by others, using markets regulated by others, using peace maintained by others, using knowledge developed by others. You accumulated wealth because society made it possible, because systems existed, because infrastructure worked, because laws protected, because education provided, because civilization created the conditions for accumulation. So wealth beyond what you personally need is not purely yours. It is partially yours for creating it. But it is also partially society's for making its creation possible. You earned the right to live comfortably. You earned the right to security. You earned the right to reward yourself for your work. But you did not earn the right to hoard unlimited wealth while others starve. You did not earn the right to die with more money than you could spend while children lack education. You did not earn the right to accumulate endlessly while society that made your accumulation possible crumbles. This is the first reason dying rich is a disgrace, because wealth beyond what you need was never entirely yours to keep. You were holding it in trust, you were managing it temporarily. You were responsible for deploying it before you died. And if you die with it, you failed that responsibility. You hoarded what you should have distributed. You kept what you should have given. You died having failed your obligation as a steward. Most wealthy people reject this idea. They say, I earned my money. I built my business. I took the risks. I did the work. It is mine. I can do whatever I want with it. I do not owe anything to anyone. This is the thinking that creates disgrace, because it misunderstands what wealth is and where it comes from and what obligations come with it. You did earn your wealth. I earned mine. But earning wealth creates obligations. The obligation to use it well, the obligation to deploy it purposefully, the obligation to create value with it, the obligation to leave society better than you found it because society made your wealth possible. Dying rich means dying having ignored those obligations, dying having hoarded instead of distributed, dying having accumulated without deploying, dying having taken advantage of systems without giving back to systems, dying having benefited from society without benefiting society. That is disgraceful, not because wealth is bad, but because wasted opportunity is tragic, because hoarded resources help no one, because potential never realized is lost for everyone. Here is the second reason dying rich is a disgrace, because dying rich means you never figured out what wealth is for. Most people spend their entire lives trying to accumulate wealth. They work hard, they sacrifice, they delay gratification, they take risks, they build businesses, they make investments, they grow their fortunes year after year, and they never stop to ask why. What is all this accumulation for? What am I building toward? What will I do with this wealth once I have it? What is the point of more when I already have enough? They just accumulate. Because accumulation is what they know. Because wealth is how they measure worth. Because more is how they prove they are winning. Because the number going up is the only goal they have. And they die still accumulating, still chasing more, still trying to prove themselves, still believing that the next million will finally be enough, still thinking that one more deal will finally bring satisfaction, still accumulating without purpose, still building without reason, still taking without giving. This is disgraceful, not because they failed to accumulate. They succeeded at accumulation, but because they never progressed beyond accumulation, they never asked what accumulation is for. They never found purpose beyond the scoreboard. They never used wealth to create meaning. They never deployed resources to build something that mattered. They died rich and empty, rich in money and poor in purpose, rich in accounts and poor in meaning, rich in assets and poor in legacy, rich in wealth and poor in everything that makes life worth living. I accumulated for 40 years. I built Carnegie Steel into the largest steel company in the world. I became the richest man alive. I won the game of accumulation completely. But at some point I asked, what is this for? What is the point of $500 million? What do I do with this wealth? What purpose does it serve? What meaning does it create? What value does it build? And I realized that accumulation without purpose is meaningless, that wealth without deployment is wasted, that resources hoarded are resources lost, that dying rich means dying having never figured out what wealth is actually for. So I spent 18 years figuring it out. 18 years deploying what I spent 40 years accumulating. 18 years building institutions. 18 years funding education. 18 years creating systems. 18 years giving away what I had taken. And those 18 years were more meaningful than the 40 years of accumulation. Because I was finally using wealth for something beyond wealth. I was finally creating purpose beyond accumulation. I was finally building meaning beyond the scoreboard. I was finally deploying resources instead of hoarding them. Dying rich means you never got to that second phase. You accumulated but never distributed. You built wealth but never found purpose for it. You succeeded at making money but failed at figuring out what money is for. You won the game but never understood why you were playing. That is disgraceful. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded at the wrong thing. Because you mastered accumulation but never learned distribution. Because you became rich but never became purposeful. Because you died having taken but never having given in proportion to what you took. Here is the third reason dying rich is a disgrace. Because dying rich hurts the people you think you are helping, your children, your family, your heirs. Most wealthy people think they are doing their children a favor by leaving them money, by passing down fortunes, by making sure their family is taken care of, by providing security for generations. This is wrong, dangerously wrong. Inherited wealth destroys the people who inherit it. I have seen it happen over and over. I have watched wealthy families fall apart over inheritances. I have seen children of wealthy men become useless adults. I have observed fortunes destroy the people who receive them. Inherited wealth robs people of the struggle that builds character. It denies them the challenges that create strength. It gives them resources without teaching them how to create resources. It provides comfort without requiring capability. It makes them dependent without making them competent. The children of wealthy men grow up believing they are special, that they deserve luxury, that they do not need to work because their father worked, that success is inherited rather than earned, that wealth is a birthright rather than a responsibility, and they become weak, entitled, useless. They contribute nothing. They create nothing. They build nothing. They just consume what their fathers built. And they raise children who are even weaker, even more entitled, even more useless. I have watched great fortunes create multiple generations of people who never worked a day, who never built anything, who never contributed anything, who just lived off accumulated wealth until it was gone, consumed by people who never created. This is not helping your children. This is crippling them. This is robbing them of the opportunity to become strong, to prove themselves, to build something, to matter, to contribute, to create value, to experience the satisfaction that comes from achieving something difficult. The greatest gift you can give your children is not money. It is the necessity to create value themselves, the challenge to build their own lives, the opportunity to prove their own worth, the dignity that comes from contributing rather than consuming. Give your children education, give them skills, give them values, give them example, give them enough to be comfortable but not so much that they never have to work. Give them the foundation to succeed but not the success itself. Give them the tools to build but not the finished building, and give the rest away to people who need it, to institutions that multiply it, to causes that deploy it, to purposes that use it, to systems that distribute it, to anything except your children who will be destroyed by it. Dying rich means passing fortunes to children who it will harm, who it will weaken, who it will cripple, who it will make dependent, who it will rob of dignity, who it will prevent from achieving, who it will turn into consumers rather than creators. That is disgraceful, not because you loved your children, but because your love was expressed in a way that hurt them, because you thought you were helping but you were actually harming, because you wanted to provide for them but you actually provided poison, because you tried to give them security but you gave them weakness instead. I gave my daughter enough to be comfortable, enough to have security, enough to have a good life, but not enough to be useless, not enough to never work, not enough to just consume, not enough to be weakened by wealth, and I gave the rest away, not because I did not love my daughter, but because I did love her, because I wanted her to have the dignity of building her own life, because I wanted her to have the strength that comes from challenges, because I wanted her to have the satisfaction that comes from achievement, because I wanted her to become someone rather than living off what I became. This is love, real love, not the false love that cripples with comfort, not the poison love that weakens with wealth, but the difficult love that strengthens with challenge, that builds with necessity, that creates capability through struggle. Dying rich means you loved your children badly. You gave them the poison that looks like a gift. You provided the weakness that feels like security. You created the dependence that seems like provision. You harmed them while trying to help them. You destroyed them while trying to protect them. Here is the fourth reason dying rich is a disgrace. Because resources sitting in accounts do nothing. Wealth hoarded is wealth wasted. Capital not deployed is capital destroyed. Money has no inherent value. Money is only valuable when it is used to create something, to build something, to help someone, to solve something, to change something. Money sitting in accounts is just numbers, just potential, just possibility, but not actuality, not value, not impact. When you die rich, when you die with millions or billions sitting in accounts, you die having wasted potential, having hoarded possibility, having accumulated power and never used it, having controlled resources and never deployed them, having held the ability to change lives and never exercised it. This is waste, pure waste, tragic waste, preventable waste, the waste of potential never realized, of opportunity never seized, of power never used, of resources never deployed, of capability never exercised, of possibility never actualized. Think about what $1 million can do. Build 10 libraries, fund 100 scholarships, establish research that saves lives, create systems that help thousands, build institutions that serve generations, change communities permanently, solve problems systematically, create lasting value. Now think about $1 million sitting in an account, doing nothing, creating nothing, helping no one, solving nothing, building nothing, changing nothing, just sitting, just existing, just being counted but never being used. That is waste. And dying with millions sitting on accounts means dying having wasted millions of opportunities to create value, having hoarded millions of possibilities, having controlled millions of dollars of power and never using that power for anything. I gave away $350 million. That money built thousands of libraries, funded universities, established institutions, created systems, helped millions of people, changed countless communities, educated generations, solved problems, created opportunities, built capacity, multiplied value, created lasting impact. If I had died with that 350 million in accounts, it would have done none of those things. It would have sat there, been counted, been part of my estate, been fought over by heirs, eventually been spent on consumption, created no lasting value, built nothing permanent, helped no one systematically, solved nothing completely. The difference between 350 million deployed and 350 million hoarded is the difference between enormous impact and zero impact, between changed lives and wasted potential, between realized possibility and squandered opportunity, between value created and value destroyed. Dying rich means dying having chosen zero impact over enormous impact, having chosen to waste rather than create, having chosen to hoard rather than deploy, having chosen to count rather than use, having chosen to die with potential rather than die, having realized potential. That is disgraceful, because it is pure waste, because it benefits no one, because it creates nothing, because it helps nothing, because it builds nothing, because it is potential that dies with you rather than living beyond you. Here is the fifth reason in dying rich is a disgrace. Because dying rich means you never became fully human. Humans are not just accumulation machines. We are not just about taking and having and keeping. We are about creating and sharing and giving. We are about connection and contribution and meaning. We are about legacy and impact and purpose. We are about being part of something larger than ourselves. When you spend your entire life accumulating and never distributing, when you die having taken more than you gave, when you hoard until death, you never develop the fully human capacities. You never learn to give freely. You never experience the joy of helping. You never feel the satisfaction of creating lasting value. You never understand the meaning that comes from contribution. You never become more than an accumulation machine. This is a diminished life, a truncated existence, a partial humanity. You develop the capacities for taking, but never develop the capacities for giving. You mastered accumulation, but never learned distribution. You became successful at making money, but never became capable of creating meaning. You won the game of wealth, but lost the game of life. I accumulated for 40 years, and during those 40 years, I was partial, incomplete, developing only half of what humans can be. I was becoming very good at taking, at building, at accumulating, at controlling, at expanding, at growing, but I was not developing the other capacities, the giving capacities, the sharing capacities, the contributing capacities, the connecting capacities, the meaning-making capacities. When I started giving away my fortune, when I started building libraries and funding universities and establishing institutions, I started developing those other capacities, and I became more fully human, not less wealthy in any way that mattered, but more human in every way that mattered. The giving phase of my life was a phase where I became complete, where I developed the capacities I had never developed during accumulation, where I learned the joys I had never experienced during building, where I found the meaning I had never found during success, where I became fully human rather than partially human. Dying rich means dying partially developed, dying having mastered half of what humans can be, dying having never learned to give, dying having never experienced the joy of helping. dying having never felt the satisfaction of creating lasting value, dying having never found the meaning that comes from contribution, dying incomplete, dying partial, dying less than fully human. That is disgraceful, not because you failed at wealth, but because you succeeded at wealth and failed at humanity. Because you developed accumulation capacities but never developed giving capacities. Because you became an expert at taking but never learned giving. Because you mastered half of life but never attempted the other half. Because you died partial rather than complete. Because you died rich in money but poor in humanity. Here is the final reason dying rich is a disgrace. Because dying rich means you understood nothing. You thought wealth was about having. It is not. It is about using. You thought success was about accumulation. It is not. It is about distribution. You thought money was the goal. It is not. It is the tool. You thought dying with the most wins. It does not. It means you lost. You played the game wrong. You optimized for the wrong metric. You measured the wrong thing. You pursued the wrong goal. You built toward the wrong end. And you died having succeeded completely at the wrong thing and failed completely at the right thing. The right thing is using wealth to create lasting value, to help people, to build institutions, to solve problems, to create opportunity, to educate, to liberate, to empower, to multiply impact, to leave the world better than you found it, to create legacy that outlasts you, to turn money into meaning, to transform capital into contribution, to deploy resources into results. If you understand this, you do not die rich. You die having given away wealth systematically, having deployed resources strategically, having created institutions that continue beyond you, having helped people who never knew your name, having built systems that serve generations, having turned accumulation into distribution, having transformed taken into giving, having converted wealth into impact. You die poor in money but rich in legacy, poor in accounts but rich in institutions, poor in hoarded wealth but rich in deployed resources, poor in numbers but rich in meaning, poor in what you kept but rich in what you gave. This is understanding. This is wisdom. This is the only sensible response to accumulating wealth. This is what wealth is for. This is how you use power responsibly. This is how you honor the obligation that comes with accumulation. This is how you become fully human. This is how you create lasting impact. This is how you die fulfilled rather than disgraced. But most wealthy people never understand this. They die rich because they never figured out that dying rich means dying having understood nothing. They accumulated without purpose. They hoarded without reason. They kept without wisdom. They died with wealth because they never learned what wealth is for. That is the ultimate disgrace. Not failing at wealth, but succeeding at wealth and failing at understanding. Not being poor, but being rich and missing the point completely. Not lacking resources, but having resources and wasting them entirely. Not struggling, but winning and not knowing what winning actually means. The man who dies rich dies disgraced, not because society judges him. Most of society thinks dying rich is success, but because objective reality judges him, because he accumulated the resources he never deployed, because he held power he never used for good, because he had the opportunity to create lasting value and chose to hoard instead, because he could have changed lives but chose to count money, because he was given stewardship and failed at stewardship. because he had the chance to become fully human and stayed partially human, because he had every advantage and wasted them all by dying before deploying them. I was the richest man in the world. I accumulated $500 million and I gave away 90% of it. I built thousands of institutions. I helped millions of people. I created systems that continue a century after my death. I deployed my wealth systematically. I used my power purposefully. I became a steward rather than a hoarder. I became a giver rather than just a taker. I became fully human rather than partially human. I understood what wealth was for and I used it accordingly. And I died fulfilled, content, purposeful, meaningful, rich in everything that matters, poor in money but wealthy beyond measure in legacy and impact and meaning and purpose and humanity. I died the opposite of disgraced. I died having honored my obligations, having used my stewardship well, having deployed resources rather than hoarded them, having created lasting value rather than wasted potential, having given in proportion to what I took, having become fully human, having understood, having succeeded not just at accumulation but at the much more important task of distribution. The man who dies rich dies disgraced. I wrote it, I meant it, I proved it through how I lived and how I died, and it remains true whether anyone believes it or not, whether anyone follows it or not, whether society acknowledges it or not. Dying rich is dying disgraced, because it is dying having failed at what matters, having wasted what you accumulated, having hoarded what you should have deployed, having kept what you should have given, having died partial when you could have died complete, having died having understood nothing when you had every opportunity to understand everything. That is disgrace, real disgrace, permanent disgrace, the disgrace of wasted life, of squandered opportunity, of potential never realized, of resources never deployed, of humanity never fully developed, of meaning never created, of legacy never built, of dying rich and dying poor simultaneously, rich in money, poor in everything else. I chose differently. I deployed rather than hoarded. I gave rather than kept. I distributed rather than accumulated. I became complete rather than staying partial. I understood rather than remained ignorant. I died having used wealth for what it is actually for. I died rich in meaning, and that is why I did not die disgraced, because I did not die rich. I died having given it all away, and that made all the difference.